Hi, I'm Lunith. My mom told everyone I was out with friends. But the truth was, I was locked in our basement. No food, no phone, no way out. For 3 days, I listened to her laugh on a video call upstairs, while I lay on a concrete floor, wondering if anyone even remembered I existed. They said it was discipline. They said it was love. But what kind of love erases you while you're still alive? What kind of mother passes crackers through the door and begs you not to tell your father? This wasn't the first time they hid me. It was just the first time someone noticed. And once the door finally opened, what came after was even worse. Would you like to know what happened next? The click of the lock was louder than usual this time. Maybe it wasn't, but it felt louder. I didn't run toward the door. I didn't scream. I stood still in the center of the basement stairs, holding on to the chipped railing like I had something to anchor me. But I didn't. Nothing grounded me. Nothing but the cold air seeping through the walls and the sting behind my eyes that I refused to let fall into tears. I heard her voice, my mother's, floating up through the open living room window, all light and rehearsed. "She's out with friends," she said. Her tone had that sing-song smile she used for the church ladies and nosy neighbors, not too casual, just believable enough. That sentence didn't echo. It etched itself into me. I wasn't surprised by the lie. I was surprised by how little it hurt this time. I backed down the stairs slowly, step by step, careful not to trip on the edge of the third one, slightly warped from moisture. The basement light flickered above my head, then blinked out completely when the door slammed shut above me. The sound of metal meeting wood was final, too decisive. I didn't even try the knob. I knew it was locked. I reached for the flashlight I kept on the cinder block ledge. The beam flickered to life, a weak, uneven cone of light revealing the usual: gray floor, folding chair in the corner, single blanket on the ground, and a bottle of water that looked recently placed. There was no food. There never was. He always said fasting built character. I wasn't sure what kind of character starvation shaped. Maybe one that stops believing anyone upstairs wants you to live long enough to eat. I sat down slowly, resting my back against the wall, the cold seeping in through the thin cotton of my shirt. I pulled my knees to my chest, shivering, not just from temperature, but from a different kind of cold. The kind that settles in your chest when you realize your family would rather erase you than deal with your truth. I heard footsteps, his, returning to the kitchen above. The cadence was always the same, slow, deliberate, the heel hitting first. "It's for your own good, Luneth," my father called down. 3 days. That's it. "Maybe next time you'll think twice about bringing our name into that therapist's office." 3 days. Again. The first time it happened, I thought I had deserved it. I had come home late from school, didn't answer his text fast enough. He said I was trying to disrespect his rules. I apologized, cried, promised to do better. He called it a lesson. The second time, I had asked why we weren't allowed to have friends over like other families. He said I was questioning his authority. That one earned me 2 nights in the dark. This was the third. And this time, the reason was clear. I'd been caught talking, not stealing, not lying, just speaking, to a therapist. "I'm doing this because I love you," he had said when he pulled the phone out of my hand the night before, saw the text reminder from Dr. Corwin, and dragged me by the arm toward the basement door. Love. Funny how that word always tasted like concrete and fear in this house. I tilted my head back against the wall and exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle in. Above me, I could hear the television. Dad's usual news station, turned up too loud. Mom's laughter drifted from the kitchen, punctuated by the sound of dishes being rinsed. If I listened hard enough, I could guess what they were making for dinner. Spaghetti, probably. She only made it when she was trying to act like everything was normal. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt intentionally removed. Life went on upstairs. They wanted it to. I adjusted the flashlight beam toward the door and stared at the tiny sliver of light underneath. That line of light was my only clock. I'd watch it shift, grow brighter, dimmer, as the sun moved. That's how I would track the days. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I let my thoughts slow and start cataloging. Who knew where I was? Who had I spoken to in the last week? What could possibly still be upstairs, untouched? My phone. Probably in pieces by now, or buried in a drawer. But he wouldn't find anything incriminating. Dr. Corwin's contact was saved under a decoy name. I had wiped our texts. The only real trail was the appointment card, which I'd stupidly left in my coat pocket. That's what set him off. Still, I hadn't given up everything. There were backup files, one email sent to myself, one line of audio, one single video. I had learned after the second time. A faint thud sounded upstairs, probably the hallway closet shutting. That meant he was cleaning up, removing any evidence of me, out with friends. What kind of mother says that? A mother who's more afraid of the man she married than she is of losing the child she gave birth to. I could see her face so clearly, smiling at the neighbor across the fence, brushing away concern with practiced ease. "Oh, you know how girls are. Always off somewhere." A flash of sympathy on the neighbor's face. Then it's gone. A shrug. A nod. And just like that, I'd vanish. No missing person report, no family panic, just a story told over coffee. She's finding herself. But I wasn't lost. I was buried. The concrete under my legs felt colder than usual, or maybe my skin had just stopped fighting it. I pulled the thin blanket tighter around me, tucked my hands into the sleeves. My fingertips were starting to go numb. I couldn't scream. Screaming in this house didn't bring help, it brought consequences. Instead, I thought about the lens. There was a small security camera tucked into the back vent of the basement. It wasn't fancy, motion activated. Set up months ago after my second lock-in. It only recorded short clips, but it was enough. And more importantly, it uploaded automatically. If it was still working, someone out there might see. If no one had unplugged it. If no one had changed the router password. So many ifs. But still, a better chance than my voice alone. They think locking me down will make me small. They've forgotten what grows in the dark. They've forgotten what grows in the dark. I hadn't. Not since the last time. And the time before that. It all blurred now, but not in a way that made it easier to forget. No, these memories stayed sharp, like glass under skin. The basement was still. The only sound was the occasional hum from the water heater in the far corner, and my own breath, steady but shallow. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the flick of my dad's wrist slamming the door. I heard my mother's voice float above me like a lie dressed in pearls. My brain kept playing it back, again and again, until it stopped feeling real. And then, like it often does in silence, my mind went back to her. Isolde. My sister and I were never close, not in the way most people imagine sisters should be, but that wasn't on us, that was on the house we were raised in. Isolde learned early that being quiet meant survival. I remember one afternoon when I was 12. She came home from school, lips split open, wrist swollen. I had asked her what happened. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "I fell." Mom was already pulling frozen peas from the freezer. Dad wasn't home yet. She didn't fall. She never said who hit her. But from the way she froze when Dad walked in, I didn't need her to. Years later, she became the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect smiles, never a hair out of place. People praised her for being strong and poised. But that strength, if you can call it that, came from learning how to disappear in plain sight. I used to think she was cold, detached, but maybe she was just scared. Scared like I am now. But I wasn't like her. I couldn't pretend everything was okay. I couldn't sit through dinners nodding like a bobblehead while my father twisted facts and turned obedience into virtue. I could never be that kind of quiet. I didn't even realize my eyes were damp until the cold stung them. I wiped them dry with the sleeve of my hoodie. Crying wouldn't help. It never had. Hours must have passed. The light under the door shifted from a narrow golden line to a cool bluish hue. Early morning, maybe. Hard to tell without a window. That's when I heard it, creaking on the stairs. I tensed. Footsteps, soft but measured. Someone coming down slowly, trying not to be heard. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and waited. Then, a whisper. "Luneth?" My mother. I didn't answer. There was a pause, and then a gentle rustling. Something slid across the floor beneath the door. I crawled over and picked it up. Crackers, a granola bar, a bottle of water. She'd done this before. "Don't let your father know," she whispered. Still, I didn't say a word. Just stared at the door, waiting for her footsteps to retreat. She hesitated, like she was hoping for a thank you. Or forgiveness, but I couldn't give her either. When I was a child, my mother was warmth, bedtime lullabies, braided hair, and stories read by flashlight. But now, she was strategy. She protected the house, not the people in it. There was another memory, one I hadn't thought about in years. The second time he locked me down here, she came in quietly at night, sat beside me, and whispered, "Sleep, sweetheart. You'll forget it all tomorrow." She stroked my hair like I was 6, kissed my forehead, then stood and left like nothing happened. That was the moment I understood. She wasn't going to stop him. She just didn't want to see it. She was the kind of woman who flinched at yelling but didn't move when the bruises came out. She ironed his shirts while her daughters were breaking. I sat there, crackers in hand, and thought about how many times she'd stood between me and the truth, not to protect me, but to make it all easier to hide. For her, for him, for the family. The anger didn't come in a wave. It crept in, inch by inch, like cold air under a door. It didn't boil. It calcified, turned into something harder than rage. Resolve. I knew what Isolde had chosen. Silence. Safety. Self-preservation. But what did that leave behind? Me. And if I went quiet now, if I let this pass, just one more episode, then I'd vanish too. But not like Isolde. I wouldn't blend in with the wallpaper. I'd become something less. A memory told through other people's mouths. A ghost that never got her own version of the story. I couldn't let that happen. I leaned back against the wall, crackers untouched. My stomach growled, but the thought of eating made me sick. I stared at the vent near the ceiling. Behind it, I knew the camera sat, small, silent, maybe still running, maybe not. But it was there. That little lens had seen more truth than any person upstairs. They thought they'd buried me again. But you can't bury someone who's still breathing. And I was still breathing. This basement didn't just take my freedom, it stole the version of me that begged to be loved. And I wasn't begging anymore. I hadn't begged. Not anymore. And that shift, subtle, quiet, almost invisible, had settled deep in my chest overnight, like something newly rooted. I wasn't sure what had changed, only that something had. Maybe it was the taste of crackers passed through a door by a mother too afraid to stand tall. Or maybe it was the ache in my back from sleeping on concrete, paired with the slow realization that no one was coming to get me. Yet. By the time the pale strip of light under the door began to fade into the dull gray of early morning, my body had given up on rest. I was beyond tired, beyond cold. I moved stiffly, my muscles sore from staying curled for hours. Even blinking hurt. Hunger wasn't a gnawing anymore. It was a hum, a rhythm in my body that said, "We're still alive, barely." I sat up slowly, flashlight in hand, and tilted the beam toward the far corner of the basement. That's when it came to me, the journal. It hadn't been with me when I was thrown down here. That meant they had it. No, he had it. I pressed my hands against my temples and breathed out, trying to steady myself. The last time he took something of mine, my phone, last winter, it wasn't the object that mattered. It was the message. You don't get privacy. You don't get control over your own thoughts. The journal had started as therapy homework, a safe space to track my emotions, but it quickly became more than that. It held everything, every moment of fear, every quote from Dr. Corwin that made me believe I wasn't the problem. Every time I watched my mom pretend nothing was wrong, every conversation half heard through bedroom walls, every time I wanted to scream but swallowed it instead, I could still picture where I'd hidden it, tucked behind the bookshelf in my room, pressed inside the fake spine of an old encyclopedia. The fact that it had been found meant one thing. They'd been searching. The door upstairs had creaked open yesterday before I was dragged down. I remembered hearing drawers slammed. The closets opened. They weren't just punishing me, they were cleaning house. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. And then, like a cruel film reel, I remembered. He stood in my doorway, book in hand, spine exposed, the fake cover ripped off. His eyes were dark with triumph, not rage, like he'd finally caught me in a crime I couldn't talk my way out of. He flipped it open, scanned a few pages, and began reading out loud. I don't feel safe in my home. I feel like I'm holding my breath all the time, waiting to be corrected. I think my dad loves power more than he loves us. He looked at me then, smiling, a smile. You don't get to tell stories that didn't happen. And with one smooth motion, he lit a match and set the first page on fire. In the middle of my room, no ceremony, no lecture, just fire. I watched it curl and crackle. I stood still because I knew better than to reach for it. That would have been seen as rebellion, and rebellion got punished. You want to write fiction, Luneth? He said. Do it somewhere else. Somewhere else. Not here, not in his house. That was the moment I knew he was afraid. Not of me, but of what I might say. He didn't fear my disobedience. He feared my voice. That realization stayed with me as the hours ticked by in the dark. Even now, in this basement, surrounded by concrete and shadows, I knew he'd made a mistake, because he forgot one thing. The camera. Weeks ago, after the second time he locked me down here, I'd bought a tiny motion sensor camera online. I told myself it was paranoia, but a part of me knew I'd need it. I'd installed it inside the air vent near the ceiling, angled just right. It connected to my laptop upstairs, uploaded in short bursts to cloud storage whenever motion triggered it. I didn't know if the battery still worked, but I had hope. And in this house, hope was more dangerous than defiance. I shifted, reached into the pile of old blankets in the corner, and pulled the wire I'd tucked away. An old habit, part of my safety kit. I used it to trace the vent, to make sure the angle hadn't changed. It hadn't. He thought taking my phone meant I'd be silent. He didn't realize I had wired the house myself. That basement camera had likely caught everything, me being pushed, the door slamming, the sound of the lock turning. My mother's voice, soothing lies through the crack in the door. The silence that followed, the kind that only exists in houses where the truth isn't welcome. I grinned for the first time in hours, not because I felt joy, but because I felt leverage. Let them lie, I whispered. I've got light. The hunger still twisted inside me, but I barely noticed now. My focus sharpened. I had something they couldn't burn, something they couldn't erase. I knew deep down that they'd check my laptop eventually. Maybe they already had. But I'd sent backups. Password protected, stored in a folder that only opened if you knew the pattern. I whispered it aloud to remind myself. Marine, 2022. Quiet always wins. Isolde's name, the year she left for college, and the things she once whispered to me after our father slapped the phone out of her hand. Quiet always wins. She was wrong. It doesn't win. It survives. But truth burns through the silence. I had nothing left to lose. No dignity they hadn't already chipped away. No reputation to preserve. No alliances upstairs. But I had proof. A blinking red light in the dark. The journal burned. But the lens saw everything. If they've decided I don't exist, then they've also given me nothing left to lose. That thought wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even pain anymore. It was clarity. Evening came again without warning. The change in light under the door had shifted from silver to slate. I hadn't eaten the crackers from earlier. Not because I was trying to be brave, but because nothing tasted like hope down here. I had grown used to ignoring hunger, but not this silence. The vent near the far end of the basement wall had always felt like a weakness in the house, a small gap, a design flaw. Now it was my only thread to the world above. I pressed my ear close to it, wrapping the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and that's when I heard them. Voices. Not just the usual clatter of dishes or the bass hum of the television. These voices were bright, performative, laughter that sounded too rehearsed. Then came my mother's voice, sweet, syrupy, the kind she used at Sunday church brunches or PTA meetings, her fake tone. "Yes, she's doing great," she said, giggling softly. "Off with friends for the weekend. You know how college kids are, always chasing some adventure." There it was. The lie, spoken like a lullaby. I stayed there, frozen, not shocked, not anymore, but deeply, soulfully done. The kind of tired that comes from realizing the person who used to tuck you in at night would now rather pretend you didn't exist than admit you were hurting. It wasn't the lie itself that broke me. It was the ease with which she told it. The call continued, laughter rising, fading, then coming back again like waves crashing against a wall I couldn't touch. Names floated through the vent. Aunt Valerie, Cousin Jenna, someone from my mother's book club, all laughing, all nodding, all believing, and there I was, 14 steps below, sitting on a pile of folded blankets in a locked room like some family secret no one wanted to air. Eventually, the call ended. Silence settled again, until my mother's voice returned, this time quieter, closer, more clipped. "Don't bring her up again. It upsets the household." No emotion in her tone, no hesitation, just finality. She wasn't talking to me, she was talking about me. In past tense, like I was a sore memory that just wouldn't fade. I leaned away from the vent and sat back slowly, staring at the cement wall. So that's it. Not only was I locked away, I was being erased, carefully, politely, with smiles, with lies wrapped in concern. I thought about all the family events where I'd been tucked into the edge of photographs, never centered, always half-lit, behind someone's elbow or out of frame entirely. Isolde in the front with her arms around Mom. Dad holding the camera like he was documenting a legacy. Me, somewhere between forgotten and too much to deal with. And now they were cropping me out of real life, too. Don't bring her up again. Not because they missed me, not because they were worried, but because I was inconvenient. That sentence echoed louder than any lock ever could. It meant they weren't just ignoring me. They were actively choosing not to care. They were rewriting the story, right while I was still in it. They were the authors now, filling in the blanks with phrases like, "She's off discovering herself," or "She just needed space," turning my reality into a footnote they'd never read again. But I wasn't gone, and I wasn't invisible. The camera upstairs had caught more than one lie now. Maybe no one had seen it yet. Maybe it was still just blinking silently in the cloud. But it was waiting. And so was I. If they could build their fiction, I could start building my testimony. I pulled the notebook from the corner, the one I'd started using after he burned the real journal. This one was made from leftover printer paper, stapled together. My handwriting was messy, uneven, but legible. I wrote, "Day 2. Mom said I was with friends. I'm not. I'm here. Locked in. Basement. No food. No light. Just the same silence. She told the family not to mention me, so I'm writing it down. Every word. Every sound. Every lie." I stopped and listened again. Upstairs, I could hear the faint hum of the fridge, the clink of a spoon against a glass, maybe someone stirring tea. The house sounded normal, like nothing was broken, like nothing had gone wrong. That's how they wanted it. My father always said, "No one needs to know what happens behind closed doors. What matters is what we present." He treated our family like a business. Reputation first, image above all, even if that meant one of us had to disappear for the others to shine. I kept writing. I began mentally outlining what I'd say if I was ever asked to explain this, not just to a friend, not even just to a therapist, to a courtroom. How would I describe the smell of damp cement, or the way hunger changes from pain into a kind of clarity? How would I explain that my mother, who used to rock me when I had nightmares, was now the one helping lock the door? I'd say this: being locked up didn't kill me. Being ignored almost did. And then I'd show them the footage, the texts I'd sent to Talia days ago, the recording I uploaded months ago from my second punishment, her voice whispering, "This is for your own good." I had more than evidence. I had memory, and they couldn't delete all of it. I stared up at the vent again, imagining the cold camera lens, always watching. My quiet witness, If they wanted to turn me into a ghost, then fine. I'd become one that haunts. I picked up the pen again and wrote one more line. They lie with smiles. I'll speak with proof. They wanted me silent, but silence is brittle, and I was cracking on purpose. By the time the house above settled into its version of night, I'd already lost track of how long I'd been without real sleep. My body was operating on instinct. Shallow breaths, slower movement, just enough to keep my mind aware. That's when I heard it. A soft creak at the top of the stairs, not the confident thud of Dad's boots. Not the heavy drag of Isolde's quiet compliance. These steps were gentle, measured in the way only a guilty heart moves. I didn't make a sound. I just crouched by the door, eyes fixed on the gap underneath. Then, sliding into view, a familiar hand, pale and shaking, extended through the narrow bottom slit. A plastic bag filled with crackers, a small water bottle taped to it. My mother's voice followed, breathless and low. Eat quietly. Please, Luneth. Don't let your father know. And like that, she was gone. The food stayed on the concrete floor, untouched. I sat back, drawing the blanket around my shoulders. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I was exhausted in a way that didn't require emotion anymore. The kind of exhaustion that comes after realizing the people who are supposed to protect you are also the ones handing you crumbs to keep you quiet. She thought she was helping, but help born of fear isn't help. It's survival for the helper, not the helped. I stared at the door, hearing nothing but her footsteps fading away. For a moment, I considered forgiveness, but it died quickly. She knew. She'd known for years. She'd seen the bruises, maybe not the ones on my skin, but definitely the ones in my eyes. She knew how Dad spoke to us. She watched me flinch every time he raised his voice or opened the hallway closet too fast. Still, she let it happen. She let him build this system. And tonight, she slipped me crackers like I was some wild animal being fed through a cage. No note, no apology. Just a whisper that said, "Keep quiet." Not long after, the basement dimmed again. Only the faint orange glow from the hallway light above filtered through the sliver under the door. I curled deeper into my blanket, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I thought about the camera. Then, uninvited, another memory surged forward, one I hadn't wanted to revisit. 3 weeks ago, my room, late at night. I had just turned off the lights when my dad walked in unannounced. No knock, no warning. He flicked the switch, scanned the space, then pointed to the tiny black dome he'd installed near the ceiling corner. "You see that?" he asked. I nodded. "That light never goes off. I see everything you do." I didn't respond, just nodded again and clenched my jaw. "You think you're clever, huh? Hiding things in books, whispering to that shrink, 'You're not smarter than me, Luneth, never will be.'" I waited until he left before I dared breathe. That camera hadn't even been connected to anything. I checked. It was fake. A plastic shell. Cheap, battery lit, not even wired. But the message was clear. He didn't need to see everything. He just needed me to believe he could. That's what control is. Not the act, but the implication. I never cried in that room again. Not even when I wanted to. I started showering with the lights off. I wrote in my journal outside, behind the garage, in a hollow spot under the deck that smelled like soil and cigarettes. All because of a plastic camera with a blinking red dot. I unwrapped the crackers slowly, chewing without really tasting. My throat was sore from dryness, but the water bottle was nearly empty. I rationed it, 2 small sips. It wouldn't be enough for another full day. And I suspected there would be another. I pulled my legs close and leaned against the wall near the door. Then I did something I hadn't dared since I'd been locked in. I spoke, not loud, not even firm, just clear. "If you keep pretending, I won't." I knew she was probably still nearby, maybe just upstairs, maybe listening from the hallway, hiding behind the excuse of folding laundry or organizing the spice cabinet, pretending the house didn't have a basement. "If you keep lying, I will stop covering for you," I said, softer now. I paused, heart thumping against the damp cotton of my sweatshirt. Silence. I didn't expect an answer. That wasn't the point. That sentence wasn't for them. It was for me. For the girl who'd stayed silent too long. For the version of myself that once thought keeping the peace was more important than naming the war. I rested my head back against the concrete, the words still fresh in the air. That was my first clear act of rebellion. No shouting, no confrontation. Just a line in the sand, whispered through the dark. They wanted me silent, but silence is brittle. And I was cracking on purpose. The moment I said it, out loud, through the dark, I felt the tiniest shift inside me. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a simple, deliberate crack in the silence they'd worked so hard to preserve. That's what happens with pressure. Something has to give, and this time, it wasn't going to be me. A few hours passed. I knew it from the changing light under the door. The golden haze had faded into that blue-gray nothing that signaled dawn. My body still hurt. My lips were dry, but the shaking in my hands had stopped. Not because I was better, but because I was more certain. I turned toward the vent where I'd placed the small, hidden camera weeks ago. It had become a silent witness, blinking red, sometimes flickering when the heat kicked in upstairs. No one ever noticed it. They never looked up. They were too busy watching themselves. It had been recording everything, not all the time, just when motion triggered it. But it was enough to capture the way my father's voice boomed when he said, 3 days down there, ought to teach you respect. Enough to hear my mother whisper through the door, don't let him know I gave you that. Enough to prove I was here, not out with friends, not traveling, not rebelling, just locked away. They didn't know the camera was still on. They didn't know the footage was still uploading, short clips, nothing too large, just enough to make it into the shared drive I kept hidden under a dummy folder labeled Homework Drafts. I crawled across the floor, dragging the blanket with me, and sat beneath the vent. I looked up at the lens, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was alone. I was being seen, even if it was just by a piece of plastic and wires. They wanted me erased, but the camera saw me, and it didn't flinch. I whispered, Talia? Linnea? Just in case the microphone caught it. My best friend, my therapist. The only two people outside this house who'd ever listened and actually believed me when I said, something's wrong. They weren't saviors, they were mirrors. And mirrors are dangerous in houses built on denial. I tilted my head back, listening to the ceiling. Footsteps. Dad's. I recognized the weight of them. Sharp heel, deliberate pace, no hesitation. Then, silence. A door opened. Probably the kitchen cabinet. Then came the click of a drawer, probably checking my phone again, as if it would suddenly reveal some new rebellion he hadn't already punished me for. But the real rebellion was invisible. It was in the quiet, in the recording, in the way I'd stopped begging. Then, as I turned to grab the old notebook I'd been using to document everything, I saw something half buried under the folded sweatshirt I'd used as a pillow. It was an old photo, creased at the corners, a bit faded, but instantly familiar. I didn't even remember bringing it down here. Maybe it fell out of my pocket when he dragged me in. Maybe I kept it on me without thinking. It was a family picture. One from a barbecue 3 summers ago. Isolde stood in the center, smiling wide, hair curled just right, arms around Mom. Dad stood behind them, grill spatula in hand like he was proud of something. And me? I was off to the side, blurred, partially blocked by someone else's shoulder, not even looking at the camera. I stared at that photo for a long time, longer than I meant to, and all I could think was, even in memories, they made me small. I wasn't erased overnight. It had been happening for years, slowly, gently, in cropped-out Christmas cards, in forgotten school meetings, in the way people said, "Oh, you're her sister?" Like it was a footnote instead of a bond. This photo just proved what I'd always felt, but never said aloud. They liked me better blurry. And now that I'd sharpened into focus, they locked me away. I folded the photo gently and slid it into the back of the notebook. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because it was evidence. Proof that the rewriting of me started long before this basement. I looked back at the camera. If the camera stays on, I whispered, and if even one person cares, this won't end here. I didn't say it with hope. I said it with purpose. Then I began counting. Minutes. Breaths. Shifts in the light. It was a game I played to stay sane, a rhythm I invented for survival. 15 seconds between faucet drips, 3 minutes between fridge clicks, 8 minutes between his footsteps upstairs. Everything could be timed. And with enough time, everything crumbles. I kept whispering names into the vent. Thalia, Linnea, please. Not a plea, just a reminder. The footage wasn't just video, it was testimony. It was my heartbeat in ones and zeros. And if they never heard my voice again, they would still have that. The lens didn't just record them, it saw me. And soon someone else will too. It saw me. And now someone else would too. That thought clung to me like breath on a window, fragile, fleeting, but proof I was still here, still alive, still worth finding. The basement stayed quiet for what felt like hours. I counted the rhythms of life above, the occasional flush. A drawer opened, closed, dishes clinked, someone sneezed, then nothing. A silence so absolute, I thought maybe they had all left. Maybe they'd driven away, left me to fade into this concrete tomb. But then, footsteps. They weren't his. Too light, too unsure. These didn't stomp. They tiptoed. I pressed my ear against the cool cinder block and strained. Another step. Closer. Then a knock. Not on the basement door. The front. One knock. Pause. Another. Then came the voice, muffled but familiar. Tentative. Concerned. Hi, is Luneth home? My whole body stiffened. That voice. That voice. Thalia! My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I had to bite my tongue to stay quiet. There was silence above. Long, too long. No one answered the door. But Thalia didn't leave. I crawled across the floor, pulling myself toward the vent like my limbs were operating without me. The tiny grate felt warm from the airflow, and I whispered up into it, desperate, shaky. Thalia, help! I'm down here. There was a pause, then she said it. Just one word, but it shattered the silence like glass. Luneth? Footsteps again, this time fast. Then the sound of her voice, urgent and calling out my name. Her words echoed and bounced off drywall. Then nothing. For a minute, I thought maybe I imagined it, but then, sirens, not loud yet, distant, building. I crawled back to the door, body trembling. Sirens don't always mean safety, not here, but this time, they did. Then came the shouting. Carver's voice exploded across the house like a hammer hitting glass. You can't come in here without a warrant. A new voice, calm but firm. We received a call of concern. If someone's in danger, we don't need a warrant to check. Verena's voice, shaky and unsure. She's not home. She left days ago. My knuckles pressed against the door. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I had learned the hard way. Sometimes, silence delivered more impact. Another voice, this one female. Sir, please step aside. Then, the sound of keys, a rattle, and finally, light. Not just from the cracked bulb overhead. Real, natural light. Warm, bright, blinding. The door creaked open slowly, and 2 uniformed officers appeared. A woman knelt down first, scanning the space with professional calm. I squinted against the brightness, raising one shaky hand to shield my face. Luneth Marlowe? The officer asked. I nodded. I've been here since Sunday. Behind her, I saw my father, face contorted in outrage, veins pulsing at his neck. She needed time to calm down, he shouted. You people have no idea how to handle discipline. My mother hovered in the background, tears sliding down her face, not for me, but for herself. Ma'am, the officer said, turning to her, we're going to need you to sit down. In the corner of my eye, I saw a blur, Isolde. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just backed away, her eyes wide, her arms folded tightly across her chest like she was holding something in. The officer helped me to my feet, steady hands under my arms. I could barely stand, but I managed. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Still, I stood. Outside, A police cruiser waited. A crowd had begun to gather across the street, neighbors who had lived beside us for years and never once knocked on the door. As I stepped out into the daylight, a rush of wind hit my face and I nearly collapsed from the shock of it. It wasn't just oxygen, it was freedom. The front lawn smelled like cut grass and gasoline. Familiar, almost normal. But this wasn't normal. This was truth bursting out through the seams of a lie too tight to hold it anymore. Detective Quilly approached me then. She wasn't like the others. Her tone wasn't clinical. It was human. "Can you tell me if anyone else knew you were down there?" I nodded. "My mom, my dad, and maybe my sister." She didn't flinch. "Okay, let's get you somewhere safe, and then we'll talk more." They helped me into the back of the cruiser. Not because I was in trouble, but because I needed a place to breathe. Thalia stood at the edge of the driveway, arms wrapped around herself, eyes full of unsaid things. I looked at her through the window, and she nodded. It wasn't just gratitude I felt, it was recognition. She had listened. She had heard me when no one else would. Inside the house, the yelling continued. "You're ruining our family!" Carver's voice bellowed. But it was already ruined. He just didn't know the cracks had started from inside. They wanted the world to see a perfect family. What the police saw was a prisoner. Justice didn't end with a verdict. It began with a door opening. 2 weeks later, I stood just outside the courtroom doors, dressed in slacks that didn't quite fit, and a button-down shirt I hadn't worn since high school graduation. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I'd expected the old shake in my fingers, the one that came with fear or fury. But today, I wasn't either. I wasn't afraid, and I wasn't angry. I was done. The bailiff called the session into order. Naomi walked beside me, her briefcase tucked close to her side, her heels clicking with a rhythm that felt like backup drums to my heartbeat. Ducked. Linnea had already arrived and sat near the witness bench, hands clasped, eyes calm. She gave me the kind of look you only get from someone who's seen you at your worst and still shows up. I stepped into the courtroom and felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. Carver sat at the defense table, his lawyer adjusting papers like any of this was a normal dispute. His arms were crossed, lips pressed tight. His hair looked thinner than I remembered. His eyes didn't. Verena sat a row behind him, hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. She wore a navy blazer, something modest, something neutral. She didn't look at me, not once. Isolde wasn't in the room. I walked past them all and sat down at the front, facing the judge. I folded my hands in my lap, nails short, palms cool. Naomi leaned in and whispered, "You're doing exactly what he always feared, being heard." The judge nodded toward us. "We'll begin by reviewing evidence submitted by the plaintiff." Naomi stood. "We request the court play footage retrieved from the basement vent camera, which our client had previously installed out of concern for her safety." The technician connected the drive to the screen. The lights dimmed slightly. I didn't flinch when the first image played. Darkness. My voice, strained and hoarse. "Thalia, help!" Then came my mother's whisper. "Eat quietly. Please, don't let your father know." Next, Carver's footsteps, louder than I remembered, the sound of a lock turning, his voice full of power. "She needs to learn. Keep her down there. That's the only way she'll respect this house." Silence filled the courtroom. No one gasped. They didn't need to. The footage spoke louder than any outburst ever could. When the clip ended, Naomi spoke again. "My client has also filed a formal complaint. She would like to read it into the record." I stood. Paper in hand, I read, "I, Lunith Marlowe, file this case against Carver Helmright for unlawful imprisonment, emotional abuse, and domestic coercion. I submit not as a victim, but as someone who survived what was never supposed to be seen." The judge asked if I wished to speak beyond the statement. I looked at him, then at Carver, then back at the bench. "I just want the truth to be louder than the lie," I said. Naomi sat back beside me, her hand steady on my back. Dr. Linnea was called to testify next. She spoke of the sessions, the warning signs, the protocols we had created in case I ever disappeared. She had followed them. She hadn't hesitated. When asked if she believed I was a danger to myself, she shook her head firmly. She was in danger, not of herself, but of the people silencing her. Then came the unraveling. Carver tried to interrupt. "This is all exaggerated. She's manipulating the system." The judge gave him a sharp look. "You will remain silent while others testify." But he didn't. He kept going. "She always wanted attention, always twisting things." The judge banged the gavel. "Mr. Helmreich, any further disruption and you will be removed." Verena shrunk further into her chair. Her eyes didn't lift. When court recessed, Naomi turned to me and said, "This is the beginning of the end." I didn't smile. I didn't cry. But I stood taller. I walked down the hallway outside the courtroom, the heels of my shoes echoing off marble tiles that made me feel like I finally belonged in a place of consequence. In the lobby, Thalia waited. She reached for me first, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself lean into someone. I rested my head against her shoulder, not for comfort, but because I didn't have to carry this alone anymore. "This time," I whispered, "they didn't win." She nodded. "No, they didn't." Back inside, the lawyers still argued. Carver still protested. Verena still cried. But none of that mattered. The truth had already landed, and it was heavier than anything they could throw back. Justice didn't end with a verdict. It began with a door opening. The courtroom doors had long closed behind me, but something stayed open. Not just in the system, in me. 3 months later, I woke up in a bed that didn't creak when I turned over. The sunlight through my window didn't feel invasive anymore. It just felt ordinary. And ordinary had never felt more luxurious. My new apartment was small. A one-bedroom above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon on Sundays and burnt toast the rest of the week. The floors creaked in all the wrong places, and the radiator had a whistle that made you think someone was shushing you from another room. But it was mine. No locks on the bedroom door, no cameras in the corners, no hallway where I had to walk with my shoulders curled inward. I kept the windows open most nights, not because I needed fresh air, but because I finally could. I wanted to hear the world. Cars driving by, kids shouting over each other on their way to the park, someone humming off-key through the walls, the kind of noise that reminded you that you belonged to something, even if it was just the neighborhood. The morning of the sentencing, I didn't dress in black. I wore blue. Not because it symbolized anything. I just liked the way it made me feel, unapologetic. I arrived early, with Naomi beside me. She carried her notes, her case folder, her confidence. I carried only my breath and the memory of that cold basement floor. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. No media frenzy, no loud gasps, just tension so thick it pressed into the corners of the room. Carver sat on the left, jaw clenched, shoulders pulled back like pride alone could hold up a crumbling empire. His lawyer spoke in a tone that reeked of desperation dressed as logic. "My client regrets any actions that may have been misunderstood." His intention was to maintain discipline within the home, not to harm. Discipline. They always use that word when they mean domination. The judge didn't blink. "Mr. Helmreich, this court finds you guilty of unlawful imprisonment and emotional abuse with sustained patterns of coercive control. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state custody." 12 years. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just turned slightly toward me and muttered something beneath his breath I couldn't make out. Maybe it was my name. Maybe it was his last attempt to rewrite the narrative, but no one was listening to him anymore. Verena stood next. Her lawyer spoke on her behalf. She acknowledges her failure to intervene. She agrees to undergo mandatory psychological counseling and relinquish all guardianship rights effective immediately. She never looked up. Not once. Outside, reporters waited with cameras I refused to look at. I walked past them like they were nothing more than shadows on the sidewalk. Some of the neighbors had shown up. I saw Mrs. Halverson from across the street, clutching her church bag, whispering to another woman as I walked by. "I always knew something was wrong in that house," she said. "You always knew, but you never knocked." "They called it justice," I said quietly to Naomi as we reached her car. It didn't feel like revenge, it felt like safety. The next few days moved slowly, like the air after a storm that doesn't quite clear. I flinched when someone rang the doorbell too long. I jumped when I heard heavy footsteps in the stairwell. Trauma doesn't vanish with a verdict. It lingers in muscle memory, in reflexes. I hadn't opened my mother's letters. She'd sent 5 so far. Each one was from a new return address, places I didn't recognize. She wrote in cursive, formal and fragile. My name on the envelope always looked like it wanted to apologize before I even opened it. But I hadn't, and I didn't plan to. Some wounds stop bleeding, but they don't stop aching. Still, life rebuilt itself in small pieces. Every Thursday night, Thalia came over with takeout. Sometimes Thai, sometimes tacos. We didn't always talk about the past. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. She just let the silence sit with me, comfortably. Dr. Linnea visited once a week, not as a therapist, but as someone who'd stayed. She brought plants I couldn't keep alive and books I promised to finish but never did. She told me healing wasn't linear, and I told her I hated that phrase. She laughed and said, "Good, that means you're doing the work." Naomi came by with case updates, but mostly she just brought good coffee and dry humor. "You're officially one of my favorite clients," she told me once, "but don't make a habit of it." I smiled for real that time. One night, my phone lit up with a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. It was Isolde. Her voice shook, just a little. "Luneth, I should have spoken up. I should have done something. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I wanted you to hear it from me." I didn't call her back right away. I didn't know if I would. But I saved the message. That, in itself, felt like a beginning. The family I was born into wasn't whole anymore. But the one I built didn't need to be perfect. It needed to be honest. It needed to be real. I didn't hang photos of Carver in my new home. I didn't hold on to heirlooms that came with strings. But I did put up one thing, a small brass hook beside the front door, where I hung a key every night, a reminder that this home didn't have rules designed to suffocate, that here I was free to open a door, or close it, whenever I wanted. Freedom doesn't always look like a banner in the sky. Sometimes it's just a door you're allowed to open and close, all by yourself. Sometimes the people meant to protect you are the ones who teach you how to survive in silence. But silence is not safety, and speaking up, even when it feels impossible, is the first act of freedom. What would you have done if you were in Luneth's shoes? If stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe. We have more real-life family stories coming, raw, emotional, and unforgettable. Your voice matters here. Let's keep the conversation going.